Okay with some sun, I think.
Yeah, really. I don't blame you.
All right, you guys ready to go?
Yeah.
Yep.
New ways of becoming. Yes, it can seem rather elusive to get there, but when you are in it, you feel it down to your very core, and it can positively affect everything in your life, from your relationships to your health and well-being, from your career path to your abundance, from the quality of your inner connection to the fullness of your self-expression. Here on the Christine Upchurch Show, we explore ways to get into that vibration of change with experts in the fields of consciousness, psychology, spirituality, health, healing, and science. Are you ready to step into your vibration of change?
Hello, everybody. Welcome. So glad you're joining us here today, live on KKNW AM 1150 in the Seattle area, transformationtalkradio.com from around the world, or of course on Facebook Live. Or you might be watching after the fact on one of the dozens of podcasts it sends up or on my YouTube channel. But wherever and whenever you're joining us from today, I'm so glad to have you here. We do the show because of you. This is my part of my service to the world, and I'm so grateful that you've joined us. But before we move forward with the show, I want to say hello to the people behind the technology. There at Transformation Talk Radio is Jacob. Hi, Jacob.
Hey, Christine. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you?
Doing very well, enjoying the weather and looking forward to the holidays coming up here.
Yeah, and I understand you're going to be seeing some sunshine for sure this holiday.
That's right. I'll be down in Tallahassee, Florida with my wife and her family for our first Christmas as a married couple and looking forward to a beach.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And it's great when families expand, whether it's, in-laws or, another child or a grandchild. And Benny, I imagine that Christmas is a big deal in your household with your twins.
Yes,
what are your plans?
Well, we're going to stay locally. Don't have the wifey attached yet. Just maybe, you never know, someday. So congrats to Jacob on the first family Christmas for you two and for the fam. And we're just going to kind of hang back a little bit, kind of spend it a little bit of time with my girlfriend's family, which is in Gig Harbor. So there's going to be a little bit more travels on this one this year.
But not quite as far as Jacob.
No. But I like to drive. I'm a driver guy, so it works out. And
it's much better that way because then you aren't reliant upon weather so much. Other schedules, whether we're talking about a ferry schedule or a flight schedule or a train schedule.
I mean, someday when I can say I have to gas up the jet or, someday, Christine, then I'll, I'll toot my horn then.
Yeah. Yeah, and I want to ride on your jet when you
more the merrier, sure. Jacob's in too. He's got shotgun.
It's interesting with live radio. It's different than when you're doing pre-records because you rely upon people showing up at a certain time and things going fairly smoothly. And, there might be a little internet glitch or whatever. But, sometimes things don't work out as planned. And today is one of those days. We had a guest scheduled for a live interview, and he's really big in the truther movement. He is also somebody who's been very vocal about freedom, particularly in Australia, but around the world. And because he's been speaking out about freedom of choice, because he has been speaking truth, he's found himself having to get an exile from his beloved country. He's now in North America, but he's going from house to house. He's got big fans all over the world, people who are happy to house him. But unfortunately, the place he's at right now, where he's finding his temporary home, he doesn't have good internet connection, and there are a lot of kids and dogs, in the small portion of the house where there's good internet. So we've decided, because the interview is so important, we're going to reschedule. We'll do a pre-record. But I thought, well, we could do an encore. But there's been something coming up for so many people I've been talking to, myself included, that I think is really important for us to talk about today. During this holiday season, what tends to come up for many people, whether it's Hanukkah or Christmas or just looking forward to the new year, the end of the current year and the new year that's coming, people find themselves not only enjoying things and having fun and connecting, but oftentimes having grief come up. And grief is one of those funny things where you never know when it's going to come up. It's not like you've scheduled a talk with your boss or your beloved partner or your child to talk about something that's important. So you've got it scheduled, or you know that it's going to happen within this context of this talk. Grief is one of those things that just pops up when you're not aware, and all of a sudden, boom, it hits you. And it has so much to say to us. But because it's not scheduled, it's not predictable, and it tends to come up in the holidays, I decided it's a good time for us to talk about it. And grief can be set off in many ways, and it has many meanings and insights for us. But because it can catch us by surprise, and because it can feel so overwhelming, and because it's often an integral part of holidays and transitioning from one year to the next, I thought it'd be an important topic today. So I just wanted to chat with you about grief. And by the way, I'm curious about the kinds of grief that other people experience. What might be coming up for you? And although I've got lots to talk about, I'd also welcome call-ins. We don't often take calls on this show. It's not generally the format, but because my listeners, my viewers are so important to me, if you have something that you want to share and you're brave enough to share it on air, no pressure here. But if you do, I'd love for you to call in. I'd love to talk to you about what might be coming up for you during this holiday season, this transition from one year to the next, this reflecting back on almost 2 years of the pandemic. Benny, what's the number people will call if they want to chat?
Yeah, we can give out, let's give out the Transformation Talk Radio number. It's 800-930-2819, 800-930-2819. While you take a sip of your beverage at the same time. That happens. I know. I should have given out more. I'm sorry.
Yeah. It's nice hot coffee. And it's funny. Our guest last week was saying that coffee's not good for us. And coffee's an integral part of my life. And, I feel like if I don't drink too much coffee and I drink at certain portions of the day that, I'm fine. But to
each his own.
Yes. And we do need to find balance in our own lives in whatever way we need to find it. And I think it's a really important message during the holidays, because sometimes we get so busy. There's lots to do if you do Christmas time in the traditional way. And it's the baking and the music and, church if you go to church, and the shopping and the wrapping and the making of feasts and the decorating. There's just so much to do that we can get really busy and not be aware of what's going on in our bodies. And one of the things that's going on in our bodies has to do with what's going on in our emotions. And that brings me back to this concept of grief. When I was growing up, Christmas at my house was absolutely beautiful. And yes, with a name like Christine Upchurch, you can probably imagine, yes, I was raised Christian. And although I embrace far broader spirituality beyond that, and there are aspects of Christianity that I found contracting, I still very much celebrate the life of Jesus and the family traditions of Christmas. And it's interesting because when I've looked back over my childhood, I've come to, after doing a lot of inner work and a lot of reflection, I found that I had serious issues with my mother, and I won't get into some of her issues. But interestingly enough, during the Christmas season, my mother showed up magnificently. She made the home beautiful. She baked wonderful things. She cooked wonderful meals. She was an integral part of the choir at church. She played music in the house. And the traditions that she brought into the home were absolutely wonderful. And I got wonderful gifts at Christmas time. And the thing is, I felt such love from my mother and my father at Christmas time. But it's been kind of interesting to me as an adult, particularly since my parents have passed away, and I've reflected more and more on our relationship and the love that they showed me, and the ways in which they couldn't show love because of their own issues. And it's brought up an interesting kind of grief for me and at moments, because when I feel the wonderful love and appreciation from my mother in particular during the holidays, I reflect back and realize how loved I felt. It brings up for me the ways in which at other times of the year, I don't want to say she fell short. She's human. She was human. Ways in which I didn't feel loved, that I felt less than, that I brought up feelings of unworthiness. So although I've got these very fond memories, it's triggered moments of grief, periods of grief, for the ways and the times in which I didn't feel loved. And that's sort of an interesting, complex, bittersweet kind of feeling that can come up for me during the holidays. But probably more than that, what I feel is grief associated with my mother not being around anymore, my father not being around anymore, my not having my parents there, not having my children have their grandparents here. And so the holidays, it's the same kind of traditions over and over and over again in some ways, and yet there are people missing. And I don't know about you, you may have experienced a loss of somebody who's been important to you during the holidays, and that can trigger grief. And I tell you, for those of you who live in the Seattle area, Molbach's. Molbach's is this wonderful nursery. I think it's the biggest one in the state of Washington. People come from all over. People come from Oregon. I've heard of people coming from Alaska just to come to the place, and it's beautiful at Christmas time. And it's been a tradition of mine to go there at Christmas time with my kids, because we get to see all these trees decorated, and it's gorgeous, and it's very festive, and it's just fun to shop. My mother loved to go there. And last year I remember walking in there with my kids, and the Christmas music is playing, and all of a sudden the tears start to stream, because I'm recognizing that my mother isn't there, and how much she loved the place. So surprising how it brings up grief of people who aren't with us anymore. And the older we get, the bigger the chances that we will have people who've been important to us in our life, family members, friends who've passed away. And the holidays, because it's sort of like it's marking yet another year of the traditions, whatever your traditions are, it can trigger the grief associated with not having that loved one in your life anymore. And also one of the things that the holidays bring up for me too, and it's, I've heard this from my sons, I've heard this from friends and clients, that they miss what they had as a child. Alternately, it can bring up for people how they see what some people had as children that they didn't have, that they felt like something big was missing. They see these movies or shows about what the holidays mean for some people, and they feel like they missed out, that holidays weren't wonderful, and so they feel cheated. I don't know if you've seen the movie Home Alone, and I think it's Home Alone 1 or Home Alone 2, this this child gets left alone, and he's only 7 or 8, and it's kind of, it's a fun movie, but it's very poignant at one point where he's walking past, his family is gone, he's by himself, and he's walking past this house, and he sees a family with people inside, and he realizes what he's missing. So it's the same kind of thing where we can long for something that we never had, as well as what we might have had. And if we don't have it either anymore or never had it, it can bring up grief. Also, I think that because of the pandemic, because of how life has changed over the last couple of years, for many of us, life is different. And again, holidays can mark, a time of tradition. And if we haven't had the same kinds of traditions, we can reflect back and see, oh my goodness, life's not what it used to be. And it can bring up grief associated with, the rug getting pulled out from under us. So grief can be big, it can be small, it can reflect what we miss that we once had, or reflect to us what we wish we had what we never had. And it can reflect how life isn't what we thought it was, or it's not what it was once. And it's sort of surprising that it can be there. One of the interesting things about grief is that it gets stored in our body. If you've ever been experiencing big grief, the loss of a loved one, whether it's the end of a relationship or somebody you love passes away, whether it's a parent or a friend or a pet, if you've ever been like overwhelmed by grief and crying, one of the things that happens is there are these acupressure points on the chest. You can see that on the screen if you're watching video, that can start to hurt, and you're crying, and it's a very physical release of the pain, but that it also triggers the grief points, which I find fascinating. And grief can get stored in various parts of the body. And I've got a dear friend, Sabrina Fritz, who teaches block therapy, where it's a matter of using this rounded wooden block to put pressure on various parts of the body to release fascial adhesions. And she was talking to me the other day about how she was doing some fascial release on her throat, and it brought up big grief. And on her side, on the sides of her ribs, how it really was releasing grief. And she found it kind of surprising. So yes, grief gets stored in the body, and you might feel it here, you might feel it in other places as well. But the grief is there, and until we release it, it continues to be there. So it's the kind of thing where I think that as we move through this holiday season, as we move through this transition from 2021 to 2022, it's really important for us to not only slow down and pay attention to our emotions, whatever is coming through, pay attention to our thoughts, but also pay attention to the body, because our bodies can tell us when we have tightness in the gut or tightness in the chest or the throat. And all that gives us information about what's being stored there that's wanting to be released. So it's interesting though, because I think that what's happening for a lot of people is there's a different kind of grief coming up. And this to me is a really important grief to face and process. And the grief I'm talking about at this moment relates to facing aspects of our belief systems that we think were built on a house of cards. And over this past year and a half, nearly 2 years, we've been experiencing external events. And yes, there's been something that has been making people sick. And yet the external response from, our governments has been very controlling. People have lost businesses when they feel like they've had the right to have their own business. There are mom and pop kinds of organizations, companies that have folded after 20, 30 years in business because their right to stay open was taken away in the name of safety. Interesting, while some, big box stores were left open, there are people who no longer feel like they have the right to choose what they put into their body. There's been a lot of control implemented. And I think what's happened for some is that people have believed that they live in a very free society. And suddenly freedoms are taken away, and they begin to question their beliefs about their government, beliefs about have they ever been fully free. And I think that when we question those sorts of things, it can trigger all sorts of disorientation and grief associated with the illusions that we've bought into. Lori Ladd, who's a wonderful channeler, who's got a great YouTube channel. If you don't follow her, please do follow her on YouTube. Also go back onto my YouTube channel and you can find an interview I did with her probably about a year ago. She talks about how we are seeing a lot of what's in our collective shadow, because it's a moment in historical time when we have to do that in order to move through it. And, she says that we've had this illusion of freedom and sovereignty that we're having to face was an illusion. And it's the sort of thing where when we start to question our beliefs, whether it's about, what's going on in our world or perhaps within the context of a relationship, maybe you've had a long-term relationship and you begin to face that it's not really built on love, that there's a great dysfunction, there might be control involved, there might be some sort of abuse that, involved. When you start to wake up to that kind of thing, you look at your belief system and say, wow, I bought into this illusion that I was loved, that I was loving this person, that there was this mutual love and respect, when in fact it was conditional, which isn't love. It was transactional, which isn't love. And when we begin to face the illusions we've bought into, that too brings up a type of grief. And it's the sort of thing where when we begin to grieve, it's a matter of releasing, obviously when we're crying, it's a physical kind of release. But the grief that comes up is something for us to observe, to, not only be aware of, but to process on some level. It might be on an emotional or intellectual level or combination of the two. It might just be a physical release. And always there's an energetic component when it releases. But what happens is once we release it, we're no longer the same person on the other side, because there's a portion of us that's been lost. And so experiencing grief is an opportunity to let go of a piece of us that no longer is supposed to reside within us, that no longer is supposed to be a part of us, that it's a matter of letting go, which is an opportunity to receive much more. And I want to talk about the energetics of grief and how it relates to manifestation on the other side of the break that's coming up. But again, I want you to have an opportunity to call in and share with our listeners if you've been experiencing some sort of grief, if the holidays are bringing something up for you, because people learn through story. And it's an opportunity to connect and share your story. Again, Benny, can you share the number with our listeners and viewers?
Sure, would be happy to. 800-930-2819. 800-930-2819.
Okay, we'll see you on the other side of this break. Back in a few moments.
Okay.
Hey.
Cool. I've got the number up on this. Yeah.
Ready to come back?
You bet.
Okay, and we have a caller too. I'll put it in the book here in just a second.
Great.
And live.
Welcome back to the Christine Upchurch Show here on KKNW and Transformation Talk Radio, and of course, Facebook Live. We are talking about grief today, and the holidays can certainly trigger all sorts of grief for us. And of course, the end of the year, we tend to reflect back on the previous year and think, what's happened over the last year and where am I headed in 2022? Benny, it sounds like we've got a caller.
We
Who is
do.
it?
Yeah, we'll take Three Feathers calling in from the Olympia area. Hi, Three Feathers.
Hi, Three Feathers.
Hello, good morning. Many blessings. How are you?
Oh, really well. Thank you. Blessings to you as well. How are you?
Thank you. I'm okay. I was listening to your show and I wanted to share a story about my father and his passing.
Okay, please do.
So, yeah, my dad he was the dining room director of St. Vincent's in Reno, Nevada. He fed the homeless for 30 years.
Oh,
he actually received the Mother Teresa Award. And in 2017, 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, he passed away. So at Thanksgiving and every Christmas, he was on the news twice a year, always asking for volunteers to help the other 363 days a year, and talking about how many people he fed. And so I think we fed like 11, I was there, of course, on Thanksgiving. We fed, I think, 1,100 people that year, that day.
That's wonderful.
And even though he was gone, the place ran like an amazing machine. But I want to tell you about the day he died. When I found out about it was November 13th, and my brother had called me to tell me. And later that evening, that afternoon, I was outside sitting on the ground, and just I could hear over and over and over, "I am with you, I am with you, I am with you." And I was like, "Dad?" And then he's like, "Oh my gosh!" And he was like happy like a kid at Christmas. And he was saying how he forgot how amazing the rest of life was. and he wasn't in
Uh-huh.
pain, and he wasn't in a body, and he was visiting me and telling me how wonderful and beautiful and joyful everything was on the other side.
Oh, that's beautiful. And what a gift to you,
Yes.
because you now know that he's there and with you.
Yes, yes. Well, and apparently they are sooner when they first pass, and then they go on about their business, but they're always available as a guide and to communicate with. But the beautiful thing is when I want to talk about when Corona first started happening, my partner at the time had a vision where he could see everybody that had passed, their souls were like holding hands surrounding the earth.
Oh,
like they all knew that this was part of it. They knew they were leaving. They knew that this was the shift. This was a marker in time, and everybody was holding hands and just kind of like supporting us here on Earth.
Yeah. And, you know, I feel that support too. This reminds me of this time in our history, reminds me in some ways of giving birth. During the labor process, it's intense. For me, there was, significant pain, even though I was very focused within and trying to go into that pain and just make it sort of energetic. Also have a misshapen pelvis because of the fact that I was in a car accident when I was 17, so it probably made things more difficult. But it's like there's this. We know that there's going to be a baby at the end of it, right? So it's very exciting, and yet it's painful. It's making us focus within. It's intense, and then there's some relief. It's intense, and there's some relief. And the only way we can get through it is to let go to the process. And in some ways, in many ways, as a birthing mother, you have to totally let go of control. And it can bring up the fear of not being in control. And it can also illuminate for the fact that in many ways we don't have control. And yet we do have this ethereal support, and there is perfection in the way things are unfolding. And Three Feathers, I too have felt this greater support, and some of what we've been experiencing within the context of the planet, from illness to the control to, all these things unfolding, is like one of those birthing pains. Like, this is intense. This doesn't feel good, but I've got to let go to this process. And okay, there's some ease. Where are we going? Oh, this is intense, So I love this visual of having loved ones encircling the planet, supporting us at this time.
Yes, yes. And we have to remember, exactly like you said, we're all going through kind of a death and rebirth. And birth is messy. It's painful and it's messy, and the changing of society and the dismantling of all of the systems that have not been working for us. It's messy and it's chaotic and it's kind of scary. But what we have to do is trust and faith that everything is going to be resolved. And if we focus on what it is that we want to see, we have a 1,000-time fold more chance of seeing that. We just have to magnetize it towards us.
And that's such an important point, Three Feathers, about focusing on what we want. But it's interesting because I think oftentimes what gets the least thought about in terms of the interpretation of information out there in the New Age movement is that we can't focus on the negative, only the positive. But if there's negative within us, and I put negative in quotes because any emotion is fine, right? There's no positive and negative. But people shouldn't be suppressing their grief because they want to manifest something wonderful. It's like we shouldn't focus too much of our energy beyond sort of like the disconnected sort of witnessing, too much of our emotional energy in this place of fear or, illuminating what's in the shadows, but rather bear witness to it. But we do need to pay attention to our own grief that's coming up, because on an energetic level, the heart chakra, which is very powerful energetically. I mean, heart math, they've shown this. It's the energy field that extends from the heart goes much further out than what comes from the brain, from the head. But the heart is our manifestation engine. And if we have unresolved grief residing in our heart chakra, then what can happen is it's kind of like, our manifestation engine is like it's driving our car, like with our proverbial car into the future. It can clog up the spark plug, so to speak. So like if we want to get on that freeway, we want to move forward towards our new earth, and we'll leave behind the systems that aren't working. We need to be able to get up to speed and on that on-ramp and get onto that new highway. And yet, if we have unresolved grief, then we end up, not being able to come up to speed. It impedes the manifestation process. So yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you, Three Feathers, about this, the need to focus on what we want. And we also need to pay attention to what's coming up for us so that we can be aware of it, appreciate it, get the important information from it, and release it.
That's fabulous information. I need to do that as well. I think you're talking directly to me. there is extra grief there, and it is hard to it's hard to feel it. It's hard to want to feel it. It's painful and it's deep. And I remember my dad telling me I was ugly when I cry, and so it's really hard for me to cry sometimes, even alone. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
and I think about how people will often talk about, I was crying, it was the ugly cry, right? And to me, I don't think of it as ugly. I think how beautiful that they have let go completely to that grief so that they can't even care about what they look like when they cry, So ugly crying is beautiful.
Right. Yes, I've heard that too.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Let me ask you a question, since it sounds like your father was a wonderful man. As you grieved the loss of him, and yes, he may still be around, or at least when you want to access your connection to him, you still lost him in the 3D realm. And I'm kind of curious about your experience. As you experienced processing the grief, did you find yourself paying any attention to ways in which your father fell short or didn't fulfill your needs?
Well, I think growing up in an era where we see shows like Happy Days, we're always thinking that our own families are falling short.
True.
Because they're not Happy Days and it's not June Cleaver. And we're realizing, we've all been kind of dumbfounded thinking that that's the way it should be, and that everything is wrong in our own families, and they're all, at some point, something seems to be dysfunctional or hidden or secret or not going well, and I think we just do the best that we can. And I had already grieved many years before that my father wasn't the father I thought I needed, I wanted, or was supposed to have according to society and TV. But he was what he was, and he did what he did. And in the end, he was helping hundreds and hundreds of people, and he was walking his path. And he told me about the miracles, and I was telling him about the miracles. When I walk my path, things just kind of fall into place. And it's all about trust. And he had to make so many meals for hundreds of people without knowing what the ingredients were going to be until the day before. And he would say, boy, we sure need some eggs. And boom, somebody would deliver, 5 dozen eggs or 10 dozen eggs, whatever it was. And so I was appreciative of when we finally connected as adults. And I was appreciative that I was able to forgive everything. I told him all is forgiven before he died. So it was in a good way. And I actually feel that I was closer to him afterwards, and so that's why I didn't have a catastrophic mourning. I'm sad that I can't talk to him anymore or see him or hug him, but we weren't that close and we lived in different states. So I feel like I'm closer to him now. He's over my shoulder when I cook a new recipe. He's wondering what I'm doing.
Oh, I love that. I love that. You know, it's interesting because with my father, you know, as a child, I really wanted to be like my father. And I know that in a roundabout way, I was trying to get his approval. Gosh, I remember if he had had fried eggs for breakfast, I wanted to have a fried egg for breakfast. You know, and he was an actuary, which is like a statistician in the insurance industry. So is it any wonder that I went into math and then statistics in graduate school and then in my career? And I felt like I was really trying to get my father's approval, and I ended up doing a lot of inner work about that. And I felt like he was never proud or didn't express his pride. And, you know, I so wanted that. And then eventually I healed some of my unworthiness issues and felt whole whether or not I got his approval. And then after having my first child, oh gosh, probably when my son was about a year old, he said to me, and he looked me directly in the eyes and he lit up like a Christmas tree. He said, you know, Chris, I am so proud of the mother you are. You are such a wonderful mother. And it felt good, but it wasn't like it was filling this void inside of me, you know, because I had already filled that void within myself. So yeah, it's interesting that we can face the grief, we can face the healing that we need to do based on our upbringing while those people are still alive, you know, whether it's our parents or, you know, forgiving somebody who molested us or, you know, a partner who didn't treat us well. And it's a great opportunity to heal all along the way. And sometimes grief will bring up new issues.
Oh, it'll bring up new issues like what's underlying.
Yes. And like it's I think about how when I was grieving the loss of my parents died a decade ago, 16 days apart from each other. So it was kind of like this 1-2 punch for me. And it was also during a period when I was trying to get out of a dysfunctional marriage. So it was like, it was pretty huge. But I found myself not just grieving the loss of having my parents in my life, you know, as the adult that I was, and not just grieving the loss that my kids no longer had their grandparents, but also I found myself grieving for having the little girl within me, grieving the loss of her daddy, whom she used to put her whole hand around his little finger as they walked through a store. You know, the 8-year-old grieving the loss of her mother who was teaching her to cook. So all these different aspects of myself in the various ages and stages had to grieve the loss of my parents and face the ways in which, you know, I wasn't getting what I needed from them, but then also after releasing some of that grief, being able to welcome the love that was coming through from them. And, you know, one of the ways in which the love came through was my mother, who, you know, had her limitations. During the holidays, she did a great job of expressing love. So I can now see that that little girl didn't get what she wanted or needed at that time. Although in the big picture, of course she did, because there was healing to do in this life. But it letting go of additional grief allowed me to open up for greater love that I missed out on because I was, you know, not getting what I needed. So,
yeah. Well, if grief can be thought of as like a balloon or like something that we're carrying, not a balloon really, but if grief can be thought of as something that we're carrying and it's a blockage, and until we can release that, there's no room for the other things to enter.
Yeah. Exactly. And it's funny because years and years ago, I was at my acupuncturist and I was grieving over something. It was before my parents passed away. I think it was the grieving of loss of a friendship, which can be a really significant thing, people. If you think that you should just be able to like move through releasing a friendship, move through it easily. It's not always the case.
Right.
But I told her I was experiencing a lot of grief, knowing full well that while she worked on me, I might end up crying. So I was just giving her a heads up. And she said, "You're grieving? How wonderful." And I'm thinking, what is she, twisted, And then she said, when we grieve, we open our hearts to more love. And I thought, that's profound.
Oh. That's
profound.
Oh, yeah. I like that.
Yeah, I do too.
I like that.
And yeah, I really do feel like it's it clogs the spark plugs of the engine of our manifestation, car, so to speak. And yeah, that it's really important. And so if you're experiencing grief out there right now, comes and goes during the holidays, because it can be a real bittersweet time of year. It's important.
And there's another grief that's coming up right now. There's another grief really that's coming up right now is the grief of being lied to. People are seeing the truth about, their corporations and companies really don't care about them. They just want them to get this thing in the arm and sign on the dotted line. And,
that's such a great point. And that's one of the illusions we've bought into. Yeah. Yeah. And
yes, the illusions. But when the veils are lifting, and we've already talked about how 2020 was the year of clear vision. 2020 vision, clear vision.
Yeah.
Right?
And
that's the apocalypse, which technically means to lift the veils. That's all apocalypse means. And so we're seeing the truth of many things, and they continue to come to the surface. It's wonderful.
Right.
But it's a lot of grieving needs to take place.
And for me, Three Feathers, one of the ways in which I've been grieving along the way since probably about mid 2020 is when I started to recognize that we were being lied to in various ways. And I've got this background as a statistician, and I worked in medical research. I've co-authored articles in medical journals. I know how to look at the medical literature and interpret it. I know what's a good study, what's a bad study, what kinds of conclusions you can make based on the data. And so I thought my purpose, part of my purpose is to give people a heads up that, hey guys, we're being lied to about all sorts of things, and things aren't the way we think they are, within the context of the medical field. And I found that people in general, most people weren't wanting to hear it. Some had this thirst for this information. But to see other people in their belief systems that have that structure impenetrable, that they're not going to change their minds. And of course, it's not up to me or anybody else to determine what they're going to believe and what they're not going to believe. But I've got frustrated and realized, I can't wake somebody else up. I can be there and share my path if they're interested. And that includes family members. I know so many people who are awake to what's been going on, and awake in my own interpretation. And they're grieving the fact that their loved ones decided to get the jab and aren't. I think that there are just a bunch of conspiracy theorists, that they're wearing tinfoil hats. So there's been grief about that too.
Yes, there's so much that's coming to light now, especially the psychology behind mass formation and how a certain percentage of the people believe something, anything, everything that they're told by a certain authority because they've been conditioned to believe only in that authority. I just had a friend tell me, I told my nephew who's in medical school about whatever it was, something that was irrefutable, nothing about the jab or anything like that, but something else that was simple and irrefutable about nutrition. And the medical student said, that's not true because I haven't learned it, or they don't teach that.
Yeah.
And then we learned that the AMA, or American Medical Association, is really just big pharma, and they're teaching you how to treat a symptom with a drug. That's all the doctors really are memorizing. And it's sad, but...
And there are people who are recognizing that that the medical system. I mean, there are wonderful people. There are lots of wonderful people in conventional medicine. I've experienced, a situation where I absolutely needed to get my gallbladder out. I was in a critical situation and a lot of pain, a lot of toxicity. I'm so grateful. I had
Same here.
this team of angelic support, and I have great respect for a lot of people in conventional medicine. But because of the power structure within that, just like there's a power structure within the government, the power structure in conventional medicine is such that sometimes they're led astray. Often they're led astray by either big pharma or by the head of their hospital that's getting paid certain ways when they do certain things, and not getting the money when they do other things. They're maybe in better interest of the patient. So I've got great compassion for it. But that system of control is something that we need to look at. And, I've known for a long time, working in alternative healing, that there are huge downsides to that. But I think that we need to, we're going through this process of devolution, so to speak, where we're going to need to have illuminated for us the ways in which these systems are not working, whether it's the government, whether it's how our community gets our food or water, whether it's the medical system, whether it's even the family structure or our educational system. We're going to have to see what is true and what's not true, illuminate the shadow behind the untruths and allow things to fall apart so that we can manifest what it is we desire.
Yes, and I think it's really important for all of us to really think from the heart, use our heart brain. Like you said, the heart sends way more signals to the brain than the brain does to the heart. The heart is our soul speaking, and it tells us what's right. It tells us what's good. And so if we can just think that when we create something, if it's not good for everyone, then it's not good.
Yeah.
And that is the way that a community functions. We have a common unity.
And yet we have to be really careful to trust our inner guidance, to remain sovereign, because that whole narrative about doing what's right for the community is getting used against our good sense, used against us in a variety of ways. So I think that it's really important.
I mean, like introducing this medical treatment. If it's not good for everybody, then it's not good.
Yes.
If you just look at the side, the adverse, that's what I mean. When you're creating something, when you're doing something, this transhumanism or whatever that's coming, if it's not good for everybody, then it's not good.
Yeah. And is it fair that some people should die so that other people can live? Because that's sort of the choice that's been put forth. Three Feathers. Oh my goodness.
Really,
I'm so grateful you called today because you've got wonderful insights, and I've enjoyed my conversation with you. And I think our listeners have gotten something out of it too.
Great. Well, wonderful. I was glad to be of assist, and you always have wonderful guests, and your show is always very poignant and on the spectrum of light. And I love you for it. And it's one of my favorite shows.
Oh, great. Thank you. And sending love to you as well. And you clearly are awake. And you have to be careful on the show exactly what we say. And I know you honored that. I'm probably going to be starting a BitChute channel so that I can speak freely. I've already had the opportunity on the Academy of Divine Knowledge to do interviews and to speak my truth there. There's strange times, but we did a great job sort of navigating in a way where we probably won't get censored. And I thank you for doing that as well.
Fabulous. Yes, I invite you to check out my Three Feathers Walks with Medicine page on Facebook. The tag I've got on there, the very first post, is a prayer for humanity. If we could give that a listen, maybe. I call it my meta prayer. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Three Feathers.
What you do.
And I want to thank our listeners and viewers. And I just want to reiterate that during this time of traditions, whatever your traditions may be, given this time of heading towards the end of the year and reflecting back, I hope you'll slow down enough to pay attention to what's going on emotionally, what's going on in your mind chatter, what's going on in your body, what's begging to be recognized, to be appreciated, to be processed and released, because letting go of the grief that is within is a way to open the heart to receive so much more love. Thank you for joining us here today, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
All right. All clear.
Thank you.
Thanks, Christine. And Merry Christmas
Awesome.
to you.